The moment my brother Burke spotted me across the conference room, he smiled the way people smile when they've already won. He was adjusting the cuffs of a shirt I'd never seen before, crisp, white, clearly new, while our cousin Darcy nodded along to whatever he was saying about waterfront property values. When his eyes finally landed on me, standing near the window with my coat still over my arm, the smile didn't disappear. It just changed into something smaller and sharper. "Lydia," he said my name like it was a minor inconvenience. "Didn't think you'd come all the way from Memphis for this." "I was invited," I said. He glanced at my coat, then at the chair I hadn't chosen yet. "Rosalind would have appreciated that. Very loyal of you." The word loyal landed the way he intended it, with the implication that loyalty in this room was a consolation prize. I didn't answer. I found a seat near the far end of the table and set down my bag. What I didn't tell Burke that morning, what I hadn't told anyone in that room, was that I already knew enough about Aunt Rosalind's estate plan to know that the renovation he'd been pricing for the past 6 months wasn't going to happen. Not with her money. Not with anything that used to be hers. What none of us were prepared for was what attorney Paul Brannigan pulled from a locked case at the very end of the proceedings. Even I didn't know about that, and when I finally understood what it contained, I had to remind myself how to breathe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Some stories need to be told from the beginning. This is one of them. My name is Lydia Carmichael. I'm 38 years old. I run the patient services division for a regional hospital system in Memphis, Tennessee, and I haven't lived in the same city as my family in almost 20 years. That distance was not an accident. I was 17 the summer everything changed. My father, Norman Carmichael, had always believed he was the smartest man in any room he entered. He had a way of moving through the world that I used to admire. Certain, deliberate, never visibly unsettled. He built that confidence on a story he told about himself. That he had sacrificed his own ambitions to raise his children right, and that the world owed him something for it. The story left out some important details. Rosalind Fairfax was my father's older sister. She'd married young and outlived her husband by 30 years, channeling every bit of grief and restlessness into the construction supply company she and my father had co-founded in Knoxville in the early 90s. The arrangement was straightforward enough. Rosalind handled operations and client relationships. Norman handled the books. For years, that worked. Then one August afternoon, when I was supposed to be at swim practice but came home early with a sprained ankle, I found a folder on my father's desk that shouldn't have been open. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the insurance card my mother kept in the filing cabinet beside it. But the numbers on those pages made no sense. Payments to vendors I couldn't find any record of, transfers to an account that matched nothing in the company's name. I was 17. I didn't fully understand what I was looking at, but I was good at math, and I understood enough. I told Rosalind. I drove to her house on a Tuesday afternoon and laid the papers on her kitchen table, and waited while she put on her reading glasses and went through every page without speaking. When she finished, she folded her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. "How long have you known?" she asked. 2 days. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." That was the whole conversation. 3 weeks later, my father called me into the living room. My mother, Judith Carmichael, sat on the edge of the couch with her hands folded in her lap, not quite looking at me. My father stood by the fireplace. His voice when he spoke was the coldest I'd ever heard it. "You had no right to involve yourself in adult business." "I had every right," I said. "She was being stolen from." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you saw." "I know exactly what I saw." The silence that followed lasted longer than it should have. My mother shifted slightly. I waited for her to say something, anything. She reached for her coffee mug instead. My father pointed toward the hallway. "Until you understand what it means to be loyal to your own family, I think you need some time away." I was 17 years old. I had $42 in my wallet and a duffel bag I packed in 20 minutes and nowhere to go. I walked out of that house into a July evening that smelled like cut grass and car exhaust, and I stood on the front porch for a long time waiting for someone to call me back inside. The door stayed closed. I called Rosalind from a gas station payphone 2 miles away. She arrived in 11 minutes. She didn't ask what had happened. She already knew, and she'd apparently prepared for it in the same quiet way she prepared for everything. The guest room at her house had fresh towels on the bed. "You can stay here," she said simply when we walked through her front door. "I don't want to cause more trouble." She looked at me with the expression she used when someone was saying something unnecessary. You told me the truth when it would have been far easier not to. That's not trouble, Lydia. That's character. Rosalind Fairfax was not a warm person in the conventional sense. She didn't hug easily or say she loved you out loud. What she did instead was show up, consistently, practically, without fanfare. She made sure I was enrolled in school that fall. She helped me apply for every scholarship I qualified for. When I got into nursing school at the University of Tennessee, she sat across from me at her kitchen table with a legal pad and helped me map out exactly how to pay for it without burying myself in debt. I don't want charity, I told her, the night before I left for my first semester. This isn't charity, she said, not looking up from the pad. This is infrastructure. You can't build anything on an unstable foundation. That sentence stayed with me for years. I came to understand it wasn't just about money. I didn't hear from my father for the first 3 years. Not a call on my birthday, not a message at Christmas. My brother Burke, 4 years older and living an hour away from our parents, sent me one text my second year of nursing school. Dad's not doing great. Might want to reach out. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to reach out to. What I learned later, slowly, through Rosalind's careful and limited disclosures, was that the legal separation of the business had not been simple. There had been an audit. Restitution had been quietly arranged. Norman had kept his house and his neighborhood reputation and very little else. The story he told about what happened shifted depending on who was asking. I worked through nursing school, then spent years at a hospital system in Memphis working my way up from floor nursing to department oversight to administration. I was good at my job, not because it came naturally, but because Rosalind had spent years demonstrating what it looked like to put in deliberate, unglamorous work without waiting for recognition. Every few months, without fail, a card arrived from Knoxville, never long, never dramatic. The Hendersons finally closed on the Maryville project. It took them 3 years, but they got there. Or, I reread that book you left behind, you underlined all the right passages. Small, ordinary messages that said, I am thinking of you, you are not invisible to me. I kept every single one. My father eventually reached out, about 7 years after I left. His email was formal and brief. He said he'd heard I was doing well. He hoped we could have a conversation someday. I wrote back something equally brief and equally neutral, and we maintained a distant, careful correspondence after that. 2 or 3 messages a year, never quite touching the thing that had broken between us. He never apologized, not once. Rosalind's health declined quietly, the way she did everything. A cardiac condition she'd been managing for years began to accelerate. She never complained. I flew to Knoxville 4 times in her final year, driving her to appointments, sitting with her in the evenings while she still insisted on reviewing correspondence herself. One evening, near the end, I found her on the back porch watching the mountains go amber in the fading light. She looked smaller than she had, though not fragile. Rosalind was never fragile, just more concentrated, somehow, like she'd distilled herself down to only what mattered. Are you afraid? I asked her. She considered the question seriously. Not of dying, she said. I'm afraid of leaving things in disorder. The business is in order. She smiled at that. I wasn't talking about the business. She passed away on a Thursday morning in March, with her housekeeper beside her in her affairs, as she had promised, in impeccable order. The call about the will reading came from attorney Paul Brannigan's office 6 days later. His paralegal mentioned that all members of the Carmichael and Fairfax family had been notified. I booked my flight that afternoon. I hadn't been in the same room as my father in 19 years. The morning of the reading was overcast. I wore a dark blazer and the pair of earrings Rosalind had given me when I finished my master's program. Small gold hoops, understated and exact, the kind she always chose. I looked at myself in the hotel bathroom mirror for a long moment before I left. I was not the 17-year-old girl who had stood on that porch. Brannigan and Associates occupied a restored Victorian building off Market Square in Knoxville. Dark wood paneling, tall windows, the smell of old paper and good coffee. It was exactly the kind of place Rosalind would have chosen. Nothing ostentatious, but nothing careless either. My father and brother were already in the lobby when I arrived. Norman Carmichael was thinner than I remembered, his hair gone entirely gray. My mother stood beside him, and when she saw me across the room, she pressed her lips together in an expression I couldn't quite read. Burke came over immediately, performing ease in the way he'd always been good at. Lydia, he spread his hands, you look good. Thanks, I said. He glanced around the lobby in the way people do when they're calculating. This is all very formal, isn't it? I thought it might be more of a family thing. It is a family thing, I said. This is just how Rosalind handled family things. He laughed, that polished laugh. I heard the company's worth more than people think. She sold Sevier County property last year. Prime commercial acreage. I picked up a glass of water from the side table. He studied me for a moment. You seem relaxed. I am, I said. He didn't know what to do with that, so he went back to our father. Norman approached me once while we waited for the conference room. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking, with the expression of a man who had rehearsed something and wasn't sure the rehearsal had been adequate. It's good to see you, Lydia. His voice was careful. You too, I said. A pause. You've done well for yourself. I've worked hard. He nodded. His eyes moved briefly to my earrings, Rosalind's earrings, and something shifted in his face. He recognized them. He looked away before I could say anything. I hope today isn't too difficult, he said. I'll be all right, I told him. There was more he wanted to say, I could see it. But the conference room doors opened and we filed inside. For the next 40 minutes, Rosalind's generosity unfolded across the table like a map of a life I had only partially known. Her housekeeper of 18 years received a funded retirement account and clear title to the small cottage on the back of the property. A scholarship fund had been established at the University of Tennessee's Business School. 10 awards annually for first-generation college students from rural East Tennessee counties. 3 longtime employees of Fairfax Construction Supply received vested ownership stakes in a successor cooperative. A veterans' housing initiative in Knox County received permanent endowment funding. Darcy, our cousin, received the contents of Rosalind's personal library, 800 books, carefully catalogued, along with a note Brannigan read aloud, because you were the only one who ever borrowed them and returned them on time. There was quiet laughter around the table. Darcy wiped her eyes. Burke had stopped taking notes somewhere around the second scholarship announcement. He was very still now, in the way of someone performing patience badly. My father had not moved. Finally, Burke leaned forward. Mr. Brannigan, his voice was controlled. We appreciate the detail. When does the reading address the primary assets, the company, the property holdings? Brannigan looked at him over his glasses. We're arriving there now. He turned a page. Fairfax Construction Supply, he began, ceased to exist as an independently operating entity 4 years ago. Burke blinked. I'm sorry? The company was dissolved through a structured acquisition completed in 2022. All operational assets were transferred to a regional cooperative of 3 smaller supply businesses, with the proceeds directed entirely to the charitable trust we've been discussing. She never said anything about that. Burke's voice had risen half a register. She chose not to, Brannigan said simply. The Sevier County property. Sold in 2023, proceeds directed again to the trust. My brother pushed back from the table slightly, as though he needed more room to process what he was hearing. My father, across from him, had gone very still. So what's left? Burke asked. The polish in his voice had worn through to something raw underneath it. Brannigan placed 2 items on the table. An envelope, cream-colored, with my name on it in Rosalind's handwriting, and a second envelope addressed to Norman Carmichael in the same hand. There are 2 remaining items of personal bequest, Brannigan said. He looked at me first. Miss Carmichael, your aunt asked that I give you yours directly. It does not contain a financial instrument. He slid the envelope across the table. Then he looked at my father. Mr. Carmichael, your sister left this for you as well. My father stared at his envelope without touching it. Burke had recovered enough to speak. That's it? His voice had a strange, stretched quality. That's everything? That is everything not already designated to the charitable trust, Brannigan said. She can't have given it all away. Burke stood up, his chair scraping back. There has to be a revision, something more recent. The estate plan was finalized 14 months ago, Brannigan said. She reviewed it with this office on 3 separate occasions. Her physician certified her full competency at each review. There is no secondary instrument. This is Lydia. Burke pointed across the table without looking at me directly. She's been in her ear for years. She turned her against the family. The room went quiet. I set down my water glass. I haven't lived in this city in almost 20 years, I said. I saw Rosalind 4 times this past year. What I did was drive her to appointments and sit with her in the evenings. That is the whole of my influence. She always favored you. She was kinder to me, I said. That's not the same thing as favoritism, and she was kinder to me because I was honest with her when it cost me something. Burke sat down. My father still hadn't touched his envelope. Brannigan cleared his throat gently. Before the proceedings closed, Miss Fairfax left one additional instruction. He reached into a leather case beneath the table and removed a tablet, preloaded and sealed. She recorded a video message approximately 6 weeks before her death. She asked that it be played in this room, in the presence of the full family, after all estate provisions had been addressed. No one spoke. Brannigan pressed play and set the tablet at the center of the table. Rosalind appeared on the screen. She was sitting in the wingback chair by her office window, the one she'd had for 30 years, with the same lamp behind her, the same framed topographic map of the Smoky Mountains on the wall. She was thinner than even my last visit, but her eyes were exactly the same. Clear, unhurried, direct. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I've finished losing my argument with time. I'll try to be brief. You all know I dislike excess." A sound moved around the table, not quite a laugh, but close. She looked into the camera. "Lydia." My throat tightened. "You didn't ask me for a single thing in 21 years. Not once. What you asked for was advice, and you listened when I gave it, even when you disagreed." She paused. "The envelope Brannigan gave you contains the deed to the Hardin Valley house. I purchased it in your name 3 years ago. It's already yours legally. Has been. I thought you should have a place that belongs to you in the city where you became yourself." I had not known about the house. My hand was on the envelope. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to. Rosalind turned her gaze slightly, as though she could see the full table. "Burke." Her voice didn't harden exactly, but became more precise. "You are capable. You are organized when you choose to be. You have spent most of your adult life measuring your worth against what other people accumulate, and wondering why the count never comes out in your favor. I genuinely hope you find something worth building, but I will not fund the search." Burke said nothing. Then she looked directly into the camera. "Norman." My father's head came up. "You taught me to ride a bicycle," she said. "You were the one who convinced me to start the company in the first place, when I didn't believe I had what it took. I've never forgotten that. I never stopped being your sister." A pause. "But I stopped being willing to pretend that what you did to that business, and what you did to your daughter, were things that could simply be absorbed into the family history and never examined. Some things don't get to be quietly forgotten just because time has passed." My father's hands were flat on the table. "What I left you is in that envelope," she said. "It's the most honest thing I could give you. I hope you're able to receive it." She looked at the camera one last time. Her expression was calm, not cold, just settled, the way someone looks when they've said what they needed to say and made their peace with it. "Take care of each other," she said. "At least try." The screen went dark. No one moved for a long moment. Brannigan quietly said the proceedings were concluded, asked everyone to take their time, and stepped into the hallway with his paralegal. One by one, the relatives gathered their things. Darcy stopped beside me on her way out and squeezed my hand without speaking. I squeezed back. Burke left without looking at me. I heard him in the hallway, already on his phone. I stayed. My father was still at the table. The envelope was open in front of him. He was holding the single page inside it with both hands, staring at it the way a person stares at something that doesn't match what they expected. After a long time he read it aloud, his voice barely carried across the table. "You didn't lose my estate," he read. "You lost your daughter. Those aren't the same loss, Norman, but only one of them still has a chance of being undone." He set the paper down. The room was completely still. From somewhere outside, I could hear traffic moving through the streets below, ordinary and indifferent, the city continuing. My father pressed both hands over his face. His shoulders dropped, not the careful, managed posture I'd watched him carry through every room of my childhood, but something much older and much heavier underneath it. "I told myself you were the one who walked away," he said. His voice was muffled. "For 20 years I told myself that." "I did walk away," I said, "because you opened the door." He didn't argue. There wasn't anything to argue. We sat there for a few more minutes, not warmly, not comfortably, but honestly, which was more than we'd managed in the 2 decades prior. When I stood to leave, he looked up. His eyes were red. "I don't know how to ask you to forgive me," he said. I'm not sure I've earned the right to ask. I thought about what I wanted to say. I'd had 20 years to think about it, and still it took me a moment. You haven't, I said. Not yet. But Rosalind spent 30 years believing people could change if they chose to. I'm willing to extend the same possibility. He nodded. He didn't try to reach for my hand or fill the silence with promises. He simply nodded and said nothing else, and that restraint, more than any apology would have been, felt like the beginning of something real. I walked out into the hallway. Attorney Brannigan was waiting near the elevator. He handed me a folder. The deed, the trust documents, the formal paperwork designating me as chair of the charitable foundation, a detail I was still absorbing. She trusted you with it, he said simply. I know, I said. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and for a moment I was alone in the mirrored interior, looking at myself. A woman in a dark blazer and gold earrings, holding a folder that contained a house and a foundation, and the evidence of 20 years of someone believing in her, without ever making a performance of it. Rosalind hadn't left me a fortune. She'd done something harder and more lasting than that. She'd left me proof, documented, notarized, irrefutable, that the life I had built was real. Not in spite of what I'd lost, but partly because of what I'd been willing to stand for at 17 years old, alone on a front porch with $42 and nowhere to go. The foundation's first board meeting was scheduled for the following month. In the years after that, I spent more time in Knoxville than I had since childhood, meeting with scholarship recipients, working with the Veterans Housing Committee, sitting in the chair that used to be Rosalind's at a table where decisions were made that mattered to people she would never meet. Whenever someone thanked me for the foundation's work, I told them the same thing. This didn't start with me. It started with a woman who drove 11 minutes to pick up a teenage girl from a payphone on a July night, and drove home without needing an explanation, and who spent the next 20 years quietly insisting that character was not a fixed thing, that it could be built, deliberately and without applause, one honest choice at a time. I think about her every time I sit down at that table, and I think she would be satisfied with how the work is going. Not surprised, Rosalind was rarely surprised by outcomes she had carefully arranged, but satisfied. That was always enough for her. It is enough for me too.